you all hear me through my phone? It seems, yes. Prime Minister, Excellencies, distinguished guests, we now move on to two roundtables this morning, the first of which is devoted to methane emissions, and the next after that is devoted to coal. I think it's fair to say that if we think back to how we view the future when the Paris Agreement was concluded 10 years ago, there have been elements that have moved on with remarkable momentum. Sadly, from the International Energy Agency perspective, which I have the honour to represent as the chief energy economist, we recently saw deployment of renewables last year setting new records for the 22nd consecutive year. But I think it's also fair to say that there are some things that haven't moved as fast as we would have hoped or expected. And methane emissions, which we're going to talk about now, is one of those. Methane emissions remain stubbornly high. And I think in the next session, we will also be looking at coal, where coal consumption worldwide remains stubbornly high and has indeed increased over the last few years, more than any other fossil fuel. So we have, I think it's credit to the organizers that they getting us to focus on some of these really difficult issues. And what I hope we will be able to do in this roundtable is to understand why they are proving difficult. What lessons have we learned over the last 10 years? And what more we can do to regain momentum on these absolutely critical questions for the future. We have a truly extraordinary group of speakers, and you will see from the program we have also quite a lot of speakers, and we have a limited amount of time, so please have that in mind as we move forward. But I'm extraordinarily privileged to welcome two sets of opening remarks and the first of those comes from Prime Minister Mottley of Barbados. Welcome to this forum. Thank you so much for joining us today. You've been very vocal in highlighting the limits of voluntary approaches to methane emissions. What do you see as the way forward on this important issue? Please, Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me here. And I recognize all who are here to discuss this most vital of matters. 2 years ago in Dubai, I believe there was a voluntary group, and Patrick, you will probably speak more to that than I can, that came together to be able to see how we could work on reduction of methane. And we felt that then, and I said it to the President Sultan Al-Jaber at the time, that we welcome the progress, but we felt that if we are really to be successful, and if we are to do what the scientists have advised us to do, then we need to have a legal construct that obligates each country to being able to work to find near zero methane. And we have the example of the Montreal Protocol. It's probably the most successful climate agreement that we've ever had. But let's get into the reality of why. If I'm flaring gas, I'm burning cash. And if I am not fixing pipes, I am losing cash. So that if we start from that first perspective, it ought to be a win-win platform. And having had discussions with Patrick, I'm satisfied that there are examples of companies that have, in fact, taken this approach. The problem with most things is that if you leave everything to the market, you don't necessarily get the resolution that you want, and it becomes that of those who can and who are mighty and those who cannot. The most perfect example of it, and we were just talking about it again, is the access to insurance. I speak to you this morning as Hurricane Melissa is devastating the Caribbean. Jamaica has been totally decimated in the western corridors of Jamaica, from agriculture to buildings to people to infrastructure. It's hitting Cuba as we speak. Haiti has also suffered from the outer bands, etc. The bottom line is that if you want to get access to insurance in certain parts of the world, it's either inflated in costs or access is denied. And that's because there is no obligation for persons to provide that access to people. So that we feel that having a legal agreement will help the world, that if in the next 15 years, 12 to 15 years, we can have an agreement where everyone says we're going to look for the methane, whether it is oil and gas, whether it is the coal sector, whether it is agriculture, which may be a bad word in Europe. But the truth is that you just have a different approach to deal with the agricultural sector, whether it is rice paddy farming or livestock, because they don't have the balance sheets that the oil and gas sector may have in terms of making the adjustment on their own. And then, of course, changing how we do waste management. It is not beyond us. And if you doubt why it is necessary, as I said, Hurricane Melissa has become the worst hurricane ever in Jamaica. The reality is that there is debate as to whether the sea was 2 to 2.5 degrees warmer, and hence the intensification into a Category 5 storm within 24 hours. But the same thing happened to Barbados and Grenada and St. Vincent with Hurricane Beryl last year. So how many times are we going to recognize that this is happening and that we do have options, and that the options allow us to speak the love language of those who want to save the planet and the love language of those who need to make returns for their shareholders because of the oil and gas sector? I'll end on this last point. We've been talking in COP about capacity and about commitment, year after year after year. And for the last 6 or 7 years, I've been making a simple point that capacity must match commitment. If not, you're going to create first-class and second-class citizens in terms of countries. The reality is that you also have countries that have access to resources that can allow them to finance their way to net zero responsibly. But if you don't allow them, you're not going to have them being able to meet the basic development platforms that they need to make. We believe that with methane and the commitments to methane, the scientists have advised that we can reverse the temperature by 0.5 degree as opposed to propelling the temperatures forward. And if you can buy that time with the reduction of temperatures by 0.5 degree, then you can buy time to address what has been clearly a difficult point, supersizing and scaling up decarbonizing technology for oil on a commercial scale. Why do we need it? Because you're going to still need fossil fuels as well as renewables if all of the countries of the earth are to have a fair chance at development within the time frame that we need. And it makes it a complex discussion. It is not a TikTok discussion. It is a discussion that requires us to be able to accept that there are nuances that we have to accept and that it is possible. And I think the first platform for it being made possible is, in fact, that it is a love language that is common to both the oil and gas sector and to the people who want to save the planet. So there's no division. Curiously, I learned just recently that even with the big, beautiful bill, there are things in there that are designed to be able to help with the carbon costs, the cost of carbon, which actually help those who want to save the planet. So sometimes gifts come in strange forms and formats. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prime Minister, for those opening remarks, which I think frame the discussion perfectly. We now move on to Patrick Pouyanné, the Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Total Energy. And as the Prime Minister mentioned, Total Energy has put considerable effort into this space. But one of the things that emerges very clearly from our own analysis of where we stand is that vast variation in performance across the oil and gas industry. So I'd like to ask Mr. Pouyanné, what more can be done to sort of equalize that, to bring all performers up to the levels of the best performers?
Okay, maybe this one, yeah. Okay. First, thank you for welcoming me today. I'm happy to contribute to your debates. Before to speak about the global, maybe just the journey of Total Energies to understand what it means for an oil and gas company to reach the point where we are. The story began in 2000 with the GGFR, which was engaging to stop routine flaring. In 2000, we took the decision that no new project in oil and gas should have routine flaring. It was the beginning, only the flow. Then in 2010, we decided, okay, maybe we could apply these same technologies on the existing fields. The result is that in 2020, compared to 2000, we had reduced our methane emissions by 50%. The triggering point, but also we knew that there was something which was not very clear on methane, because if you want to act, you need to measure. And in fact, on methane emissions, most of the reporting were done by flows of gas multiplying by intensity factors in exercise, you know. And then we are reporting the figures, which my first job when I was in my career was to control pollution in the north of France. So I knew that Excel files could be wrong, you know, you need to measure. So on the science side, in 2015, our teams, our R&D teams, decided to engage with finding and developing technologies to measure with drones in order to be able to have a better, I met, by the way, Mr. Rostand, who explained me that satellite could be useful, but we've done it in another way to try to develop technologies to have access to data. And then we decided, okay, let's use these drones on all our assets, and we discovered that, by the way, sometimes we were overestimating the measures, sometimes we were completely wrong, we were underestimating. So that means that there is something we need to know what are the emissions, the first topic. It's not so easy, but sometimes it's the first point. Then Glasgow Agreement, and I discovered that methane was really, as you said, Mrs. Prime Minister, very something, a low-hanging fruit. We could probably, if we are tackling methane in the oil and gas industry, accelerate our roadmap to lower our scope 1 and 2 emissions. So then we decided, we set a target. We reviewed, in fact, all the emissions. And in fact, it's not only routine flaring, and there was the idea that we must stop routine flaring by 2030. It's also stop venting. It's a matter of air instruments, not using gas for air instrument, but compressed air, very simple things. Controlling our storage. Sometimes you have emissions coming from storage. All that was not representing at a globally level a lot of $1 million. Of course, in oil and gas, I know that we manipulate easily tens and millions of dollars, but at the scale of what we do, compared to other technologies, it was possible to manage it. And we said, okay, by 2030, we should be near zero emission, which means less than 0.01%, reducing again by 80% at absolute terms. We are already done in 5 years, 60%, which means that when you focus on something, if you measure, you can act, you can do it. And I think this is why when we, in 2023, Sultan Al Jaber set the oil and gas development charter with OGDC. I propose myself to be one of the champions. I'm honored to have been selected and to promote this idea that in the OGDC we have two main objectives, which is stop routine flaring by 2030, near zero methane emission by 2030. It's ambitious because, of course, we went from a group of companies, which was the OGCI, I would say the 12, 13 largest oil and gas private companies, which already embarked in that journey. To be honest, in 2020, when we decided at OGCI to make this statement near zero emissions, it was not given. I can tell you, an intense discussion between CEOs around the table, but we engaged the top 10 of the top leaders. And then the idea was with OGDC to engage as well national companies, which is another topic. And today we are in OGCI, you have 56 companies. Around 20, 25 are, I would say, international companies, and 35 are national oil companies. The journey has begun, and I can tell you the journey is first to have data to collect. And in fact, to be honest, Bjorn Otto is the secretary of the OGDC, and he's pushing everybody. The first topic, but like in OGCI in 2015, you need to organize the reporting. And some companies do not have a reporting, to be clear. And we are progressing. The annual report of OGDC will be published in Belém, and I can tell you that last year there were only 18 companies who had an action plan on methane. This year we have 31. So, we progress. We have more than that, but the others action plans are not qualified, as would say, as valid. Valid as really engaging. So it's a journey, and you have to accept it. If you begin to say OGDC is a failure because we don't have immediately a reduction figure, no, it's a journey. We need to put in place the reporting. And what the journey means that, in fact, we are organizing very pragmatically some training for people There is even some mentoring. TotalEnergies is mentoring Sonangol in Angola to help them to progress. So we have identified the largest national companies with whom we need to engage, depending on our own proximity to them, and we progress. We progress, and again, at the end, it is feasible. So I'm a little passionate about it because I'm sure that it's a real, very pragmatic contribution to the oil and gas industry to reducing some the emissions and these methane emissions. So OGDC is engaging. I differ a little from Mrs. Prime Minister. I think voluntary can work. Regulation only does not work because it's a matter of engaging companies. There is a little difference between the Montreal Protocol and methane. Montreal Protocol was about CFCs, and we ban them and we replace them. To replace natural gas will be more complex, to be honest, so we need to find a way. But it's finding the right measure between the progress, the voluntary, and on the other side, the commitment is always a debate in these matters of environment, which is not easy. Generally, if you put a price on emissions, it's a good idea. You know, if you incentivize people by pricing, then you see progress. You know, economic players, when they have to pay something, they generally try to pay less. Like, by the way, what you said, stop routine flaring is just saving gas, which is a natural, which is money, and same for pipelines. We can do more, in fact, so there is OGDC. The OGMP 2.0 was also something very useful. People say it's only about reporting, but again, if you don't have a reporting, you do nothing. So engaging companies in OGMP 2.0 is really, for me, still a way to progress. And as OGMP 2.0 is elevating its standards of reporting, year after year, it's obliged each company to be stronger, including with non-operated assets. You know, that's one I can tell you. Where for me, I'm controlling my operations, so I'm very strong on that. As soon as I have a non-operating participations in some LNG plants, for example, there I have to advocate, to push them. But it's part of the duty of our people to engage more companies. So we should not diminish the impact of this type of reporting activities. There are other ways to progress. So that's, I would say, what my contribution is that, yes, we are. It's never going quick enough. I understand. I agree. But this methane on the oil and gas part, we have the tools. It's not requiring a huge amount of investment. We know what to do. Stop venting, stop flaring, air instrument, things like that are easily accessible. It's a matter to engage each company, including national companies, to do it. And that's what we are committed to. And again, I mean, for me, the three champions of OGDC meet almost every quarter under the leadership of Bjorn. We are always pushing him to go quicker, but we know that it's not easy to engage all people. So be a little patient before to conclude it doesn't work. It's for me, again, OGCI, we were really able after 3-4 years to really begin to produce objectives of reductions for the full group, which is the objective. I know Mrs. Prime Minister is not patient, but she's pushing. This is your job. But I will advocate that honestly we are on the right path. And of course, the 56 companies do not cover the whole planet. It's clear. So we don't engage with Turkmenistan. And I know that Mr. Rostand will publish satellite photo on Turkmenistan. I'm sorry, but it's up to you, the diplomats, to find a way to engage them. We are there. We are ready to go. We are ready to move. But you know, you have countries where it's difficult to engage. Russia is another one for other reasons. But that's the reality. So when I see some reports, sometimes a little frustrated because I'm convinced we progress. But okay, there are some areas of the world which we need to find ways as well to engage. So that's my view. Honestly, today we can do a lot, including in my company. I've decided that we are just deploying 10,000 detectors across all my assets, because the idea is to be able to detect leakage and to react immediately. The motto in the company, you must react on methane leakage as you do it on oil leakage. You know, when you see an oil pipeline, the problem methane, you don't see it. So you need to measure. And this is an effort, 10,000 detectors, infrareds, flow meters, which is around $30 million. Again, it's a lot of money. We can afford it. I consider that compared to what we make, it's really a way to be active on it. So that I need to convince other companies to engage like me. But I hope when some companies are leaders, that others will follow.
Thank you so much, Mr. Pouyanné. And I think there's some themes there that I'm sure we'll be developing: data, measurement, engagement, but also thank you for highlighting that there are really tried and tested ways to make this work. That I think is a good place to move on to the role of regulation, how this looks from the perspective of policymakers. And I'd like to pass the floor to Rita Schwarzelo-Sutter, who's Parliamentary State Secretary in Germany's Federal Ministry for the Environment, Climate Action, Nature Conservation and Nuclear Safety. You recently took up a role as a global methane champion. So when you survey the sort of international landscape on this issue, where do you see the gaps?
Oh, thank you first, Prime Minister, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for the Paris Peace Forum for the invitation. And you are right, I'm pleased to be part on this roundtable for the first time in my new role as Global Methane Champion. And let me start not with the gap, but with the goal and what we can do. Methane is an immediate solution for dramatically slowing down global warming before climbing tipping points are exceeded, which would accelerate climate change at an unstoppable pace. And 5 years after it was agreed, the global methane pledge is beginning to show results. But greater efforts are now needed to ensure that the targets can actually be met. As outlined by the IEA, the oil, gas and coal industries are the sectors with the greatest potential for reducing methane emissions over the next 5 years. It is now time to end flaring and venting and to stop super emission events and major leaks. And it's good to hear that you have your detectors, 10,000, but I think there is some potential. The standard for coal mining, particularly metallurgical coal for the steel industry, must be the application of coal bed methane drainage prior to mining and the application of ventilation air methane utilization technologies for all underground mines. And at COP28, the world's nation agreed to move away from fossil fuels. But when it comes to methane, we heard we need to act now. We will continue to use fossil fuels during the transition, but we must ensure that their use is clean as possible. This is in line with the principle of cleaning up while phasing out, and the EU methane regulation is at the heart of Europe's contribution to the global methane pledge. We have included fossil fuel imports in our transparency requirements in the EU methane regulation. This sends a clear signal that consumer responsibility does not end at national borders. The EU will require complete emissions transparency from all producers starting in 2027. The OGMP 2.0 gold standard developed by the industry itself serves as the methodological basis for monitoring in oil and gas. A similar set of rules is also urgently needed for coal production, especially in the steel sector. And the steel methane program of the International Methane Emissions Observatory can dramatically reduce coal bed and coal mine methane emissions. The EU is not alone in its efforts. Several governments and industry stakeholders are currently moving in a direction similar to the EU methane regulation. These include the Japanese-Korean Clean Initiative and the Oil and Gas Decarbonization Charter and Industrial Initiative. The next step after these transparency initiatives is evident. We need agreement on methane intensity values for the trade in the fossil fuels, oil, gas and coal. Producers now need to guarantee the methane intensity values they can offer their buyers, and producers need assurances from the importers that clean production will be rewarded. However, the climate is not benefiting from progressive consumers cherry picking while the rest of the fossil fuel industry continues as before. We need a fossil fuel industry that operates more effectively across the board without flaring and venting and with practically no leaks. And I think engagement is good, but engagement and regulation are better. Finally, a word of financing. Not least, we need financial support from the oil and gas industry via funding mechanisms such as the Global Flaring and Methane Reduction Partnership to help producers in developing countries become cleaner producers by 2030. Germany and the EU are participating in IMEO and the Climate and Clean Air Coalition to help partner countries modernize their regulations and support national industries in becoming net zero producers. And reducing methane emissions can only truly be an immediate solution in international climate action if agreement is reached on methane intensities. To achieve this, we need to bring many different producing and importing countries to the table. And I'm interested to see what ideas emerge from our dialogue on issue today. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed. You mentioned the EU methane regulation. You also mentioned some other transparency initiatives, Japan, Korea, elsewhere. Go now to Mechthild Wösdorfer, the Deputy Director General of the DG ENER in the European Commission. And interested perhaps to follow up on that to see, how do these initiatives fit together? I mean, are we moving towards something that Laurence Toubiana spoke about before, this idea of a sort of buyers club? What's the view from the Commission on that?
Thank you, Tim. Dear Prime Ministers, Excellency, also a big thanks to inviting me here to the Paris Peace Forum, but also to the 10th anniversary of the Paris Agreement, and a historic step, as we heard this morning. And it's also very good to focus on methane emission. I think we all agree it's the second most powerful greenhouse gas, and it's also the fastest, as we heard, way to slow down global warming. And the EU is still dependent 2/3 of fossil fuel. We have done a lot of efforts with the European Green Deal, and we will continue decarbonization. We learned also since the invasion of Russia and Ukraine in 2022 that security of supply and diversification is a crucial step. The EU will decide by the end of the year to phase out Russian gas completely by 2027. So this is one step which you can see the geopolitical context right now. But, and we are focusing a lot on competitiveness and affordable energy. But diversification, in our case, EU away from Russian gas, and of course, speeding up clean energy transition, renewables, nuclear, energy efficiency, and others are the context. And in that context, we came out in 2023 with the EU methane regulation. It's the first regulation worldwide. It's the first of its kind. We had tough negotiations at the time already. We were a lot of dialogue with the industry. And I had the pleasure of negotiating it then with the European Parliament and the ministers. And it's in place since 2024. So we are now working with all the EU member states, but also third countries, because there are a lot of requests and I would even say pressure while we are implementing. And we want to implement the EU methane regulation while engaging with industry, with the member states, and with third countries. And it's really what also Patrick Pouyanné said, it's built on transparency. We need more transparency. What we can also get more evidence on methane emission measurement, reporting, and abatement efforts. And our methane regulation is focusing on oil, gas, and coal as the lowest hanging fruits. Of course, we know about agriculture, certainly in some of our EU member states, but we are focusing here. And we want to reduce, and we are working with the countries, and there are particular workshops right now also with third countries. We need more LNG, as we know. So we want both. We are covering both imports and produced in Europe. But of course, as I said before, 2/3 are imported when it comes to Europe. You asked also about our common efforts. So what we did already, we are part of the conveners of the Global Methane Pledge, where now 159 countries implementing the goal of reducing methane emission by at least 30% by 2030. So this is, and we are working, of course, very closely with the International Methane Emission Observatory, Julia is next to me, and also the Climate and Clean Air Coalition. Martina is also here, part of the roundtable. We are supporting other countries concretely, like 2 examples. COP29, we gave 105 million to grants funding for methane abatement action in partner countries, and in Dubai, 175 million in support of the methane finance sprint. So we are also working with third countries and financing concretely to help them. Speaking about Japan, as you mentioned, Tim, Japan and the EU are similar in the need of fossil fuel imports, and we have been working together, EC Japan, LNG Importers Initiative Alliance for Methane Mitigation from the LNG value chain since 2024. We are also working closely with them, and we are happy that Japan joined IMEO recently, earlier this year. And we are aligned with the Clean Initiative, which was also mentioned by Rita, and on of course, the Oil and Gas Methane Partnership 2.0, which was mentioned, which is the basis of our EU methane regulation. So the idea is really, on one side, we work with our EU member state. I was in Bucharest, Romania yesterday, where 25% of the methane emission inside the EU are coming from. So they have particular challenges. Here, we try to help them. With all EU member states, we pressure them to implement. A regulation needs to be implemented at the same level by all 27 EU member states. And we are reaching out to partner countries like Japan. In COP30, we will organize an IMEO ministerial co-hosted at the Japanese pavilion. So we put methane also in COP30 high on the agenda. We want to share our expertise, and we see that a lot of industry, but also other initiatives, are based on the EU regulation with measurements, transparency, and doing more in that area. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much indeed, Mathilde. And the last speaker on this sort of block on regulation, international cooperation is from the UK, Ruth Davis, the Special Representative for Nature. So how do these sets of issues look also from a UK perspective?
Thank you very much indeed, Prime Minister, Ministers, Excellencies. It's a pleasure to be here on behalf of the UK at the Paris Peace Forum. I too would just like to acknowledge the extraordinary transformative impact that the Paris Agreement has had, and to look forward to Belém as a place where we can all come together to drive action further forward. The UK remains, as you know, absolutely committed to the kind of multilateral action that the Paris Agreement represents, and also fundamentally to something that is based on science and understands the actual on-the-ground impacts of climate change in the way that Prime Minister Mottley has reminded of us this morning. This is a context in which methane is both something that tells us, that the science tells us, offers vital opportunities, but I think everyone around the table has recognised that the opportunities are at this point untapped. And I can recall going back over many years, previous roundtables in which conversations have taken place where there's been a recognition that methane is one of the things that we could address to give us a very early opportunity to limit temperature rises, but that action has not taken place at the speed that is necessary. And I think that's one of the reasons why the UK is so committed to moving forward on this agenda. I'd like to start by just pointing to the UK's own action in this area. We've taken significant steps to reduce domestic methane emissions, and by 2023, those emissions have been reduced by 62% since 1990, which is one of the highest rates of reductions amongst OECD countries. And we are proud of that track record and will continue to drive it forward, but we recognise that we can all do more. Today, we will publish a UK Methane Action Plan, and the plan will focus on the key areas that we've all mentioned today, on agriculture, on fuel supply, on waste sectors, setting out how we will deliver our policies and accelerate existing ones, as well as highlighting UK ambition to show leadership internationally. And the international question then touches on many of the issues that have been raised so far. The UK recognises the importance of understanding and addressing emissions associated with imported fossil fuels, and we're very keen to work with and to learn from our international partners on the these issues. We do believe it's vital for countries to come together and improve monitoring and reporting practices for methane emissions in the fossil fuel sector internationally, and clearly to make this more consistent, as we've already heard. But building on efforts to date, there is also a need for countries to work together on approaches that will actually begin to reduce emissions, including by ensuring that the right incentives are in place for improving methane emission performance in fossil fuel production. We know that in trying to reduce methane emissions from global oil and gas production, there is a need, as has been recognised by others, for support for developing country producers. And in this context, the UK is pleased to be funding the Climate and Clear Air Coalition's fossil fuel regulatory programme. But knowing that we need to do more, we are proposing that we come together at COP30 at the highest level, if possible, to signal commitment on this important issue by agreeing on a statement of how we will take this work forward cooperatively. And we would be particularly delighted if countries and organisations who are represented here at the Roundtable could support this agenda in Belém and beyond, and we're looking forward to discussing that with those of you around the table. I will just finish by reminding ourselves that cutting human-caused methane emissions could indeed act as a climate emergency brake. Reducing global methane levels by 30% by 2030 would avoid approximately 0.2 to 0.3 degrees C of warming by 2050. That is a precious amount of ambition that we could potentially capture. Decisive action is needed now. The UK is willing to work with as many partners as possible around the table to keep these climate ambitions on track and to increase the pace and scale of change in the way that's needed. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much also for talking about the action plan, the Belém initiative, and also for remaining close to the allotted time. That was much appreciated. I would encourage everyone to look at the bar in the top left-hand corner of the screen as they speak, because we are short of time. We're going to go now to some brief sort of perspectives from the scientific community, starting with Philippe Bousquet. We've heard the energy sector is not the only source of methane emissions globally, but how would you characterize briefly its role in driving the sort of developments that we've heard about?
Yes, thank you very much. I will switch back to French a little bit just to change, if you mind. Merci. Donc, je travaille depuis plus de 15 ans.
Thank you very much. I have been for more than 15 years now working with 80 scientists as part of our scientific group to try and measure and quantify through the integration of atmospheric and satellite data the impact of methane emissions at regional and global scale, but also by activity sector. So we've talked about these 30% key share, but 30% is indeed the main figure, 110 million tons per year. That is the energy sector's representation. And this oil and gas sector represents a lot in the share of the methane emission. So these emissions haven't been decreasing lately. Europe has done a lot, geographically speaking. It's been doing well, but in Asia or in North America, the emissions have been increasing. So this is still a very big issue, and this is something that you've underlined already. But reducing these methane emissions is one and maybe the only solution that would help with global warming. This is maybe one of the least complex solutions to implement. Maybe it would be easier than oil and gas. It would be easier than other solutions. And when it comes to agriculture, it is still even more complex to implement solutions. So I think this is what we have to do. 30% is also the goal of the methane pledge. We've talked about it. And that is what we need to achieve by 2030 compared to 2020. So when it comes to the oil and gas sector, I think we should go back to zero and go back from scratch. We really need to achieve that and use all the sectors we can to decrease these emissions. And this is something that's been mentioned as well during this roundtable. So we need to reduce emissions as much as possible when it comes to methane. What's at stake is while being able to act quickly, because we know that we need to act on CO2, but this is a lot more complex, and we need to really work on our on changing our habits, and this is a lot more difficult. Now, according to the latest studies, this is really what we need to work on, methane emissions. And now to conclude quickly, methanes are anthropological emissions, so based on human activity, but 40% of methane emissions come from natural causes, and this is impacted by climate change. So if these natural emissions were to increase, and this might actually happen, we don't know at what scale, but this is what could happen, we would actually need to make more effort, even more effort. So we really need to look at these natural emissions and make sure that they don't increase. But this is what I wanted to say. And I also wanted to say that from the scientific community's point of view, we are working on methane, and this is an important part to work on reducing global warming. Thank you.
For covering a lot of ground in a short amount of time, so very much appreciated for that. And I'm going to pass the floor to your neighbour, Dreyfus, who's going to talk a little bit about, how do we narrow that gap between the commitments, the pledges, and the real actions that we're all interested to see.
Thank you, Prime Minister, ministers, excellencies, people who have decision-making power, as opposed to we humble scientists who can tell you the direction of things and when directions are off. As we heard earlier about the role of the compass and a journey, but we also need to be thinking about, and you can help lead, what the destination is. It's an honor to be with you here today to share some of what we've learned through science about methane's distinct role, and some of you have mentioned, in driving climate change. Consider this, and I'll give you some new stats just to put in perspective when we talk about methane's potency and speed. Just thinking about the emissions at current rates, so current annual emissions of human-caused, not to mention the warming-induced emissions of feedbacks that Philippe just mentioned. So current human-induced emissions of methane and fossil CO2 are adding roughly equal heating to the planet right now. This is because while methane emissions are roughly 100 times less than CO2 emissions from the fossil sector, methane is about 100 times more powerful at trapping heat over its 10-year atmospheric lifetime. And this is compared to CO2, which has approximately a century-scale lifetime. And this combination of potency and shorter lifetime is what makes cutting methane emissions such a potent emergency brake to slow planetary overheating. In fact, pulling the methane emergency brake, as we've heard mentioned, could avoid around 3 times more warming by 2050 than action focused on CO2 alone. These are complementary strategies. And with current rates of warming on track to put us over 2 degrees Celsius by mid-century, we need to be putting into action these dual strategies that can slow warming now and limit warming later this century, consistent with a Paris climate goal. Indeed, the more we can limit heating now, the more we reduce the risks of crossing irreversible thresholds in climate and human systems. We are leaving the envelope of the stable climate human societies have benefited from over the last 6,000 years. I got to do paleoclimate work when I was at the LSE. Ice cores are cool. We are seeing warning signs of crossing thresholds in several planetary systems, including tropical coral reefs, the Amazon rainforest, and the North Atlantic Ocean currents. Slowing warming is urgent, but the methane emergency brake will only work if we, and by we I mean the decision people can make here, not the science. The science can't pull the emergency brake. It's deciders who can pull the emergency brake. And so next year will mark 250 years since Italian inventor Alessandro Volta discovered methane on the shores of the Lago Maggiore. Our understanding of methane and the climate have come a long way since 1776. As we've been hearing, we know that methane, especially from the oil and gas sector, contributes about 1/5 of annual human-caused methane emissions, and that the vast majority of these emissions are unnecessary. And as others around this table we will hear from next will attest, we have new tools that are improving our ability to detect and react to and stop this methane waste. So 10 years after Paris and 5 years after the Global Methane Pledge, Now is the time for leaders to lead and to move from intentions to action and impact.
Thank you so much, Gabrielle. You mentioned these new tools that we have to detect and react, and that's the topic for our next sort of group of speakers. We go first to Giulia Ferrini, who's head of the International Methane Emissions Observatory. You have a particular role in dealing with the information that we get on super-emitting events and then passing that on to people who can do something about it. So perhaps you could talk to us a little bit about how that works.
Thank you, Tim. So I'd like to start with a recent discovery that I've made. You know that more than 2,500 years ago, Homer mentioned natural gas flaring in the Iliad. He described the eternal flames of Chimera and warned that they were dangerous. And those flames were powered by natural gas and hydrogen seeping from the earth. Centuries later, the first Olympic flame was lit there, and this is a powerful reminder that humanity has long lived alongside methane emissions without realizing their impact. And today we can finally measure and manage what the ancients could only witness because we have data. And data matters, and caring about the data matters even more. At the United Nations Environment Programme's International Methane Emissions Observatory, we're harnessing a methane data revolution that is shifting the world from guesswork to actionable insights. So we're celebrating the 10th anniversary of the Paris Agreement, and we are midway into the critical decade of the Global Methane Pledge. And these two commitments are inseparable, by the way, because without action on methane, vision set out in Paris will remain beyond reach. And so 10 years after Paris and 5 years into the Global Methane Pledge, we now have the tools. UNEP's Methane Alert and Response System, or MARS, relies on satellites and AI to detect large methane emissions, what we call the super emitters, in near real time and to notify governments and companies. Since we launched it, it has issued thousands of alerts across more than 30 countries, prompting concrete mitigation from Turkmenistan to Yemen to Argentina, Algeria. And the response to these alerts have jumped from 1% at the last COP to 12%. And this reflects UNEP's convening power and its collaboration with partners like the IEA, the World Bank, the Climate and Clean Coalition, and the EU as co-convener of the Global Methane Pledge, who have actively encouraged governments to respond and to use these tools. IMEO has provided training in case capacity was limited to help governments respond to these alerts. But 12% is really not enough. And to truly address these events, we need all notified partners to engage. Only then IMEO can help identify the opportunities, connect the actors, and turns alerts into actions. And that's why UNEP and its partner will continue to support governments and companies to strengthen their ability to respond to MARS alerts, but the critical step is for governments to nominate focal points who can respond to these notifications, for companies to join the Oil and Gas Methane Partnership 2.0, because the response rate is much higher among OGMP companies. OGMP is now adopted by 150 companies, 42% of global oil and gas production. It's the basis of the EU methane regulation, and it's making the data usable by those on the ground, because the manager of an oil or gas site cannot act on last year's data. They need site-specific, timely data to identify and reduce the leaks, and this is what OGMP delivers. Now we're extending this beyond oil and gas, including sectors like steel that were mentioned earlier, where methane has roughly a quarter of the industry's climate footprint. So unlike Homer's time, we now have the tools, but we also have the responsibility to use them. So let's turn data into action and keep the promise of Paris alive. Thank you.
Thank you, Giulia. We are also facing some harsh mathematics in this session. We have 15 minutes before we have a hard cut-off, and we have another 4 speakers. We really need to keep things absolutely to 3 minutes or less. And I'd like to pass across to Anton Rostan. Lots of mentions of data, satellites. Please tell us more.
Yes, so the good news is that we can measure a lot of things with satellite, and measurement was the key problem that around methane. And we don't see everything, but what we see very well are the basin or country level emission over a 1 year period, or the super limiter, so the very large leaks above 100 kilos per hour. And yes, we do see a big difference between what we measure and what is reported by countries or company countries is typically we see 3 times more or 5 times more than what they report. And the industry is times 10. So there is one order of magnitude between what we can see, and this is proven, and what is reported. There are a lot of reasons, in particular the Excel versus measurement that Patrick was mentioning. And we do see the companies that are progressing, in fact increasing their reporting to close the gap. So we really see the real movement. And what is interesting with the satellite technology that we've developed with the LSCE is that we can differentiate between bad players and good players. There are good players like Equinor or company like Total or countries like the Saudi. The Saudi, in fact, they are betting on being the cleanest producers. And we can measure that and we see real progress. And some bad actors, and we see them, and there are a few of them. There is not a lot of bad actors, but these bad actors, they release so much methane that it completely eliminates the impact of the good actors. And in terms of regulation, I think we need to change our mindset. It's good to go, like Europe is saying, to go to a perfect system where we measure intensity and da-da-da-da-da. But this will take a lot of time because the satellites are not ready. It's very far away before we can have pure data on everything. But we can act today on what we see, which are the super emitters. We know exactly who are the bad actors. It's a few countries. The US are increasing by 15% versus their commitment of minus 15%. And this was under Biden. So we can imagine what is going to happen to their GMP pledge now. And in the 70s, we had an issue on the road, and we invented the radar and the speed ticket. And I think we have a very easy solution which costs nothing, which is to send a speed ticket to the bad actors. We have the list, but I am not a state actor. Maybe we can work together and you send a speed ticket, even if it's 0. But so that people realize that they are known, and when they release methane, when they could have flared it, when they are not doing what Patrick was mentioning, the world should know. It's a few players, it's a few countries. It's very easy to do, and I'm sure that this speed ticket system can really change the game because there will be an incentive for bad players to change.
Thank you so much, Antoine, for giving us a very crisp and short reason why data and satellite imagery is so important. We now move to the issue of finance, because Marcelo, the Global Methane Hub, has been a major actor in that space. Perhaps you could talk a little bit about how we might scale up the availability of funding for some of these actions.
Great, thanks for that. And as you all said, we could reduce temperature around 0.3 degrees. But a big one is if we have near zero methane, a big commitment that accompanies the European Union's approach. We could have 75% mitigation done at very low cost and could reduce 1/10 of a degree, which does make a difference. Because when we talk about Paris, and as we're reminded of this, the High Ambition Coalition really set the standard with 1.5 being the goal. And it was about surviving. And I think right now we also need to understand that if we do not address overshoot, we will actually have a very moral problem of throwing those people literally under the bus of climate change. So the European Union's regulation, I think today, it's very clear to understand that it's probably the single most important policy to protect climate today in the short term. And it's under attack. And we can't have this initiative be bullied by one country. It's one country wanting to not do something is one thing, but if that country doesn't want you or anybody else to tackle climate change is a totally different thing. And so I think we need to stay strong, and that's why it's so important that other countries show support of this approach. Myself, having been the former environment minister of Chile, when we are phasing out coal, and we've reduced coal power in half, we said we'll go to gas. But I didn't know that it depends on where you get that gas. If that gas is from leaky Permian, it's twice as much of the emissions than if it was somewhere for low leakage rate. So it actually can be as bad as coal. And I think that goes to tell us that if we do not address methane emissions, the natural gas transition could be very much under question. And this also applies for ammonia, hydrogen, and other commodities, or even compressed natural gas transportation to replace bunker fuels. If you have high leakage rate natural gas ships, the emissions are twice as high. So I want to say that we are working with OLADE, we'll hear about them, but one of the things that we want to do is provide data that's low latency of leakage rates that could be used to help provide alerts and have them be addressed. But again, we can't be successful without having funding, as you had said. We will fund around $100 million these coming 3 years on implementing methane mitigation, both transparency, supporting countries, supporting groups like the CCAC and IMEO. We've already delivered $400 million in these years. And I also wanted to say that this does not end in energy, and agriculture is not a taboo. We're launching an initiative for $100 million for rice research to reduce emissions using less water, and that's a winner. Agricultural methane is also, we have a research initiative that has already delivered $150 million in research on enteric fermentation, in which the UK recently joined supporting. And the MDBs are actually stepping up. The World Bank, IDB, AFDB, IFAD all have combined to $20 billion of development finance towards methane mitigation. What's lagging is the energy sector still, and that's because a lot of MDBs understand that investing in fossil fuels is bad, yes, but reducing methane emissions is Paris-aligned, and so that's why we're supporting the Climate Bond Initiative to show a taxonomy that shows that that's also possible. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Marcelo. We have less than 5 minutes and 2 speakers, so I'd like to pass across immediately to Martina Otto from the CCAC to talk about some of the support that they're providing for methane abatement programs. Thank you.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks very much, Prime Minister, Excellencies. Pleasure to be here. Well, one thing is we've provided support to over 30 countries to include methane into their NDCs. And the NDCs, as we know, are a national direction of travel and are the investment plans for the future. So it was critical to get that in. And we've seen some progress in focusing on this particular sector we discuss here today. As of 1st of October, 31 countries have now included fossil fuel measures, methane measures into their latest NDCs. And that includes 7 of the top 10 and 20 of the top 50 fossil fuel emitters, and together covering about 60% of the sector's emission. So things are happening. We see more and more regulation coming into place, and obviously the market levers that are gaining traction we've heard of as well. But, and that's a common thread through it, we're moving in the right direction, but not fast enough. And we have to scale this up. If we are serious about the emergency brake, nobody is pulling an emergency brake in case of emergency just a little bit, right? We have to do it fast and forcefully, and that's where we are. The good news is, in the Global Methane Status Report that we bring out at COP, we know that we can still do full implementation of the low-cost measures that we've identified in the Global Methane Assessment, which gave rise to the Global Methane Pledge, and still make good on the Global Methane Pledge objective. And that's good news, but we have to act on it. Now, we heard quite a bit about the market levers and so on. Regulation, I want to really build on that, is a way to connect the national plans to operator actions. We heard, thankfully, that while the costs admitted from the sector itself that the costs are actually really low, and regulate, but the return on investment on the things that we can do to leakage repair and so on is much lower than putting it into new exploration. Let's just face that. That's why regulation is also really important to give a direction of travel. That's why the CCAC has created the Fossil Fuel Regulatory Program to fast-track support to countries, and that's also to address a capacity gap that we've identified. Not everybody is in a position to devise and enforce regulation at the same level. So it's critical to help, and that's upstream, midstream, and downstream. So it's really key. We have a first cohort that received support through the Fossil Regulatory Program. That's Ghana, Iraq, and Kazakhstan. They're underway. We will have new announcements up at COP30. Our goal is 20 countries to be supported, but we also need more funding for this. And I want to close with a triple bottom line. Low emission intensity is achievable in the sector. It's a matter of shared responsibility, because then we can reward top performers and raise the floor. And we heard that earlier from Germany already. It doesn't help only screaming off the top layer of performers and get that into a place and then have a good feeling about that. We have to raise the floor, otherwise the methane emissions will still be out there. And the last bit is really that regulation is key to unlocking it all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Martina. And our last speaker is Gaston Sirard. It's an important new initiative in Latin America and the Caribbean on this issue. And Gaston, please, I'd like you to help introduce it.
Thank you very much, Tim, and thanks to the organizer for the invitation. You know, our region, Latin America and the Caribbean, we face multiple challenges in managing methane emissions. Our region is heterogeneous, so we have both exporting and importing countries, producers of natural gas and producers of oil with associated gas, and we alternate between countries with strong private investment and other where national oil companies control the majority of the production. So today we have 8 countries over the 27 countries from OLADE members that produce more than 99% of the regional gas output, reaching almost 200 billion cubic meters. So since 2023, the observatory has made constant progress, and we have established a strategic partnership with a lot of players that are here around the table. We have identified major gaps in measuring and reporting the national inventories and assessing their maturity. And we have confirmed that only 25% of those countries, they had their own emission factor, and barely 10% of them disaggregate them by technology. So this also reflects the reality of our region. And in September of this year, so last month, after more than 15 months of work, and thanks to a technical cooperation, we have published the first version of a roadmap for a low-emission natural gas certification standard. And this opens toward international standards. So we have developments such as Mars that allow us to respond quickly to an event of methane leak. And we also have voluntary initiatives like OGMP 2.0 that enable transparent emissions reporting and provide a solid technical reference and prepare producer for the future regulation, such as the UAE methane regulation, which from 2027 will require independent verification for the import of natural gas. So that's why it's important to redouble effort in regulation and certification. Martina just mentioned it. So we are fully aligned on these objectives. So from OMLAC, we will continue working in this direction with countries, with companies, in order to harmonize regulation, which is key, and to promote energy interconnection and to produce low-emission natural gas. So I hope that this forum will help us to achieve this objective. And thank you very much for the time.
Well, thank you so much, Gaston, and thanks very much to all of our speakers. I think I'm just about to be cut off, so I won't linger on the microphone, but just to say one of the very clear points that's come throughout this session is that we do know how to do this. And so hopefully when we next convene, we will be able to point to verified, demonstrable reductions in emissions, not just in the best performers, but all around the world. Thank you so much.